Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Keynote podcast. I'm your host, Solaris, and I interview up and coming producers in the EDM scene. Today, I am joined by Emma, aka Mewnlight Rose.
Hello.
Emma is a producer who creates various types of different genres of melodic EDM music, and her Twitter bio describes it as music you can drink water to.
So you better stay hydrated.
And so at the time of recording this episode, you recently, a couple weeks ago, you actually played a set at ExoFest, which was this Minecraft festival that was hosted by the label Exobolt and the Shimatsuki Club. The set's on SoundCloud, and it's labeled Valley of Time. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit more about why you went into kind of deciding to create a themed set rather than just, playing whatever music you decided you wanted to?
The theme actually came after I had finished the set. When I looked at how the whole set was structured, it went down in pitch to begin with, and then went up in pitch afterwards. And while I was going down in pitch, I was mostly playing, I wouldn't say super old, but rather old music. And as it went upwards, it was more recent music, so I kind of noticed, it's kind of like a valley going through time, so to speak. So that's why it's called Valley of Time.
So that's a really cool kind of idea you got going on there. Is that since you don't really play a lot of, kind of sets live, and especially now since, the whole pandemic and all that, but, with the kind of, the kind of insurgence of online festivals, do you hope to kind of play more online festivals in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I'm kind of expecting that now that this whole pandemic has been going on, there's been sort of an insurgency and refocusing of where you can have events. It doesn't have to be strictly live events where you have to show up in person. There's been a lot of focus being put into stuff like VR and Minecraft and just overall online events. So I'm hoping that there's going to be more of those in the future, even post-pandemic.
Yeah, I had Paper Skies on one of my episodes, and we actually ended up kind of talking a little bit about the kind of, how kind of COVID has kind of changed with the whole field, with how COVID has kind of changed the whole kind of landscape of the entire, scene. And especially, like you said, with the whole kind of idea of just like online events and just seeing a lot of just kind of event names that you would normally see with, live events. Now we're seeing a lot of different names that are hosting all these virtual events. For example, like we talked about Space Yacht with the whole Halcyon thing, and with like Phonon Set specifically, because he really kind of gave something different to a lot of, what was going on in EDM at the time.
Phonon is absolutely revolutionary.
And I think,
so many fronts.
I think that's just a common opinion of, I think everybody who I've had on my show. So,
I mean, we're all producers. When we see someone do something so differently, of course, a lot of us are going to freak out and be all like, that's interesting. It's really
I think, yeah. I mean, we all kind of call him like the dubstep Jacob Collier in a way, since, like basically all of us musicians just love Jacob Collier because after all, they say like jazz is the musician's music. So
it sure is. Or rather, it's nerd music.
Yeah. Well, musicians, we're nerds by nature.
So. Pretty much, yeah.
All right. And so then let's kind of dive in a little bit more into your history then. So you've been producing music for about, I want to say 12 years now. Reading from your Spotify bio, you say, I downloaded FL Studio in 2008 and it all went downhill from there. So that's been around, 12, 13 years now. So what was it that kind of first got you into music?
The weird response I can give there is it's actually Pokemon that got me into it. Growing up with Pokemon games, I was super interested in the music in there. And so I went on YouTube back when I was a kid, and I found that there was a whole slew of people making like remixes of Pokemon music, and among them there was a YouTuber called, I think, Poke Remix Studio, who made it very clear, I think in his YouTube bio or something like that he uses FL Studio to make his music. And instantly I was just like, I gotta check that out. So I did, and it all went downhill from there. Nah, actually, from there onwards, I was just like experimenting with trying to make the same kind of weird video game remix stuff that Hook Remix Studio was making. And it was only in like, I think 2013, 14 or so, that I started making EDM instead. And that was, first of all, a lot easier because there's a lot more tutorials on how to do that. And second of all, something I could actually make something out of. So that's kind of where my career started.
Did you have any musical background before production? Or is production your kind of like first endeavor into just music in general?
I had piano lessons from I was 7, and I would kind of noodle around on pianos, but no like real musical composition training in any way. That was all just kind of self-learned along the way.
And so you talk about going between, making like Pokemon remakes of video game music from Pokemon, and then EDM later, becoming an EDM artist. So where did that kind of crossover happen? Like, what was it that got you into EDM then?
First of all, someone introduced me to Pendulum right around when Immersion came out, I think. And that opened a whole world for me when it came to specifically drum and bass music with kind of a rock tinge. That was kind of how I first got introduced to EDM. While everyone else was getting introduced through Skrillex and such, I didn't really like Skrillex all that much. What really made me fall in love with EDM and try it out myself was actually Monster Cat. I found I'm not gonna say what YouTuber, but some YouTuber I was watching used Monster Cat music in the background. I thought it was really cool, and then I checked it out and found just a whole label of really musically interesting EDM that wasn't all about being loud and abrasive, but had a lot more like chiptune video gamey elements to it. So that instantly got me a little more interested. And from there, I kind of discovered the whole world of EDM.
Yeah, I think it's kind of really interesting to kind of see, especially like you mentioned Monster Cat, and I think basically every single guest who I've had on this show has, been influenced by Monster Cat in some way, since we're all kind of in this age range where we all kind of grew up listening to Monster Cat, when we were probably around like 13, 14, or even younger.
Yeah.
So it's kind
I,
of really kind of cool to see something that big play such a big influence on all of our lives.
yeah, and also just like the whole vibe and whole theme of Monster Cat music at that time was very video gamey, very, I'd say, internet native EDM, where it wasn't really as focused on the the dub and reggae roots that dubstep otherwise has. Had much more of of the background of the kind of things that we grew up with. I feel
Hmm.
stuff like video game music.
I see the same thing with a lot of people who listen to Virtual Riot, and I mean now since he's released the album, I kind of see everybody just kind of realizing that Virtual Riot, because we've kind of grown up with his sound in a way as
Yeah,
well.
I didn't really realize it, but Virtual Riot did a lot of the things that were exactly what I wanted to do before I even realized he was the thing.
Hmm. So it's kind of cool to see, not only just like Monster Cat, just as like a, not like as a company, but just as a community is just, and all us just all kind of being involved in the community in some way, you know, not necessarily by just like being like the most active fan or whatever, but just by listening to the music, and also just virtual Riot, and just he himself, and has just played such a huge part in all of our lives.
And I feel like there's a lot more artists within that whole area as well that you can point to. And I feel like you could define like a whole subgenre that you could call like internet native EDM, where I
Mhm.
would also include people like Boss Fight, for example.
Yes, I mean, also Porter, I think he's another.
Absolutely, Porter
Yep.
Robinson as well. Yeah.
I just had a Cloudy Sky on this show, and he was talking about how, like, when he first got into music and people started saying that his music kinda sounded like Flickr, and he had no idea what that meant.
How wonderful.
And then he checked it out, and then he, like, listened to Worlds for the first time and then, like, completely understood what everybody was talking about.
Oh man, I remember listening to Worlds the first time around. I was not that impressed, honestly. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but it was kind of a slow burn for me. I didn't really take it all in to begin with. But it was only like throughout the years that I first of all saw how influential it was, but second of all, like really listened to it and just took in how much was happening, how unique it was in the EDM world.
And then for your alias, because your alias is also a very, you know, unique thing, since it's not, because it's pronounced Moonlight Rose, but of course, you know, there's a misspelling of the word moonlight there. So kind of how did that come around?
Well, it started off being just Moonlight, and it wasn't my alias to begin with. It was just the name I kind of went off. I kind of used online. And obviously, Moonlight is a very common word, so there's a lot of people who have that kind of name. So rather than you know putting random numbers or being like XX Moonlight XX, I decided to misspell it, and that's kind of how it became less common of a name, so I could actually use it for myself. And then the Rose part uh, got added because I joined a an internet community way back in the day, where kind of the way we knew who each and everyone was in it was that we had the last name Rose. Uh, so that's kind of how that morphed into the weird amalgamation that was my internet name. And then I just turned that into my alias when I started releasing music, and that's kind of just what I've gone with since then. The cool thing about it being so weird is that it's search engine optimized. If I search for myself in Google, I'm the first thing that comes up.
Yeah, that's always a good thing, and like all the people who I've talked to, and I've talked to like specifically about, you know, like their names and all that, they've always kind of said that like they're happy with the name that they've finally chosen. You know, even if some of them, you know, went through, you know, rebrands along the way, they're like finally happy with their name because it gives, you know, good SEO results.
I guess so. I've actually, on several occasions, thought about whether I should change the name, but every single time and every time I've brought it up to other people, they've been like, "No, keep it. Makes it unique." And I'm just sitting here like, okay, so I'm unique because I misspelled a name. I hoped it was other things that made me unique, but okay.
And so and so like I've said before, you've been making music for a pretty long time. So I want to kind of know, what is your favorite song that you've released then?
My most recent one, Isolation. Definitely that one.
Why is it your favorite? Just curious.
Well, first of all, it was an undertaking. It was an absolute undertaking. It took like a year to put together. Um, and it's also a very important song for me. Really encapsulates the last year and a half before I made it. Uh, so there's a lot of personal value in it. And aside from that as well, I just feel like it's my most it's the song that I'm most proud of on a technical aspect as well. It's really well produced, in my opinion, in comparison to a lot of the other songs I've made. I set out with kind of a goal, and I feel like I not only achieved it, but went above and beyond with it.
And so with, having grown as an artist over the past 13 years now, how is it specifically, would you say, like, could you, like, say anything specific that's, like, about your kind of evolution as an artist then?
I feel like I've gotten better at. Well, when I started out with the Mewnlight Rose aliens, I had a very clear-cut idea of, I want this to be my sound. I want these exact details to be how people can recognize my music. What I didn't realize when I was doing that was that I was kind of limiting what I could do with my music, because it had to fit those specific details. So as I've made more music, I feel like my um my style has gotten a lot more varied. I let my taste define my style rather than just setting limits for it. And because I make much more varied music, I feel like I've gotten much better at making varied music as well. Like when I set out to make one certain thing, I feel like there's a lot more influences from various other genres and just various other inspirations that come into it in comparison to how one note my music used to be before.
And so kind of branching off of that, you kind of talk about, basically letting your kind of music taste and just a lot of what you're listening to at the moment really kind of reflect, how, like, the kind of style that the song is, because you don't necessarily, stick to like one genre or anything. Like there's definitely I think you could say that there is definitely kind of a Moonlight Rose kind of style, but it's not necessarily like, I can't, you know, say it's like one specific genre that you make. So with that, if I were to look through whatever music listening platform you use, which artists would I see a lot of that you listen to?
Currently, outside of EDM, you'd see like Nightwish and yeah, Nightwish probably. They've been a band that I've been interested in for a long, long time. Inside of EDM, though, you would hear a lot of Exabolt currently. You would also hear this new compilation that came out on this new compilation that No Mana put together called Electromag, which is entirely like 2008 inspired electro and complex drone house. It's super good, and I recommend, if anyone's grown up during that time and kind of missed that music, you should check it out. But aside from that, a lot of smaller artists, um, like for example this one artist named Epecta, who released a song a while ago called "Congratulations, You Are the 1 Millionth Visitor." I think it's a really, really fun track. And yeah, aside from that, just kind of the standards, I guess you could call them, uh, like, Virtual Riot, listening to a few Monster Cat things here and there, Mode Step, just that kind of overarching electro-ish music, mostly.
Mhm. All right. And so then kind of going into a little bit more of just like producer things then. So how do you like kind of start a song? Like how does your workflow kind of work then with music?
It kind of depends on what has inspired whatever song I'm gonna start on. If there's any specific sound design or like any specific hook I have in mind for it, I'm gonna start off trying to make that kind of work. See if I can even make that in the first place, because if I can't, then there's no point in making the whole thing. But yeah, I start off with that kind of main element, whatever it may be. From there onwards, I kind of make short sections, and then I try to perfect them, and then move on to the next section. I know it's maybe not the best way to produce music, but it's kind of how I've grown up making music, which means that I have a lot of works in progress that are like super short but super detailed, and like no intro, no ending, nothing of that kind.
And so then with, being an artist, then what is it that you enjoy the most about being an artist?
I just like making music first and foremost. It's kind of what I've grown up doing. It's kind of what I've grown up loving. I love the idea of like having something in my head, and then not only having the knowledge and tools to turn that into something that's on the computer, but also just like going a step above that, like having an idea, putting it down, and then just mutating and adding stuff on top of it to make it so much more than I could even imagine to begin with. Just that whole exploring whatever is going on in your mind and on the screen and in your headphones and all. That's something I find super duper interesting and super duper rewarding.
And so then bouncing off of that, what do you find being the most challenging aspect?
The most challenging aspect for me is definitely finishing stuff. I,
I feel
I, I
that
feel like
too.
I feel like that's something a lot of people understand. But yeah, finishing stuff and also just being consistent with it, because kind of ebbs and flows how much I can stick to whatever I'm making. I end up abandoning a lot of things that I work on. I've recently gotten better at it, but yeah, that's still what I feel I struggle most with, to be honest.
All right. So we are kind of wrapping up a little bit here, and I just have a couple just other kind of questions for you here. So I guess a question that I always like to ask everybody is having to do with, what do you wish that your younger self had known when you started out in music? So like what do you wish that, you had known back in like 2008 when you kind of started out?
Uh, it takes freakishly long for things to be rewarding in terms of stats, in terms of people listening to your music, and in terms of getting on various labels and such. So try more than anything not to get too caught up with the numbers, because it's gonna take freaking years until anyone even notices. More than anything, just focus on enjoying making music for the sake of enjoying making music. Focus on just bettering your craft for the sake of having more fun with it and being more proud of yourself. And the rest will come in due time. Or it won't. Maybe it never will. But the overall point is you're probably not gonna have any fun with it if you're just focused entirely on getting popular, on getting people to listen to it. Because it's not a guarantee, and even if it is, it's gonna take a while.
And so then kind of bouncing off of that there, how difficult really has it been for you to kind of, stand out then?
It's been I'm not entirely sure how difficult it's been, because uh it's never really been something that I felt I've even gotten good at yet still. So it's easy to just answer everything, but uh yeah, and it's been challenging working as hard as I want to work on the songs, putting them out, and then kind of have it be only interesting for like a couple of weeks. Because I know a lot of other producers that can produce very quickly and put out something kind of every 2 weeks. I've never been able to do that. So I kind of just fall behind on that front. But I've kind of, because of that, I feel like I've learned to not really focus too hard on that, and just learn to look back at the legacy and discography that I have, and just enjoy that for the sake of what it is, not as much how popular I've gotten over the time of making it.
And so with that, you kind of talk about, not having to, try to, have like a consistent, like every 2 weeks or so release, because I feel like for a lot of people, and even a lot of people who are currently listening to this podcast, they just kind of think that that's just crazy. And whoever is able to do that, just God knows what they do with their time. They just kind of lock themselves and just work on music 24/7. But
I've never figured out how people do that. I'm not gonna try to figure out how people do that. I don't think I would be proud of what I make if
Mhm.
yeah.
And so kind of as a creator, we all deal as creators, we all deal with creative blocks then. And I kind of want to know, how do you, go about, trying to manage a writer's block?
I kind of just embrace it. If I've got some kind of creative block, some kind of art block, I don't stress it too hard. I just kind of sit back and go, okay, I don't think I'm gonna be able to work on these things for the current time. I feel uninspired. I dread opening FL Studio. I'm just gonna wait until I feel okay doing that again. Um, Creative block for me is more so just something I take on as a sign of where my own mental health is going. So if I'm having any problems working on music, I just kind of focus on myself and try to get better personally. And then whenever the inspiration strikes, I let that happen as well. Which is also why I don't release music a lot often. It's not really a great technique for if you want to consistently release music, but it works for me in terms of just being happy making whatever I make.
Mhm. Which I think is probably the most important, and it's just for everybody, and I see it, like, especially now, since with COVID and we're just all kind of, inside and all that. It's always just important for us to just be able to be, checking on our mental health.
Exactly. And I was on an entire hiatus during that time. I did not have the energy to release anything for like over a year during that time.
Mhm. And then so when you kind of talk about how you're just trying to, just kind of embrace the fact that you've kind of had like a producer's block in a way. Is there anything else that you kind of like to do outside of music then?
Well, first of all, I like playing Deltarune. And if I'm not working on music, I like first of all hanging out with my friends and with my partner, doing whatever we want to do, which often involves video games. I like working on other digitally creative aspects like video editing or graphic design or like video game sprites. It's something I've been doing kind of on and off for longer than I've been making music. Not exactly good at it, but it's something I have fun with.
Okay. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about kind of video games and just how they've kind of affected, just kind of a lot of us, just kind of with the whole kind of Monster Cat and us just kind of coming from like these gaming communities in a way. So you definitely say that like video games has played a big part in just kind of even, kind of creating your kind of style of music then?
I'd absolutely say so. They've opened a lot of doors for me in terms of how I even think about music and musical theming per se. I really like if I get the idea for it, I really like making evocative music, with some sort of theme. It doesn't have to be like a specific story or anything in the music, even just like a feeling of, for example, being near a volcano that's about to erupt or something, was kind of what inspired my song Volcano. So video games have helped a lot in like having music as the background element to kind of enforce that whole theming. That has done a lot for how I think about music and how I think about a lot of art to begin with.
Hmm. I had Inverted Silence on my show a couple weeks ago as well, and he had taken a class when he was in university that was like about like video game music and specifically about kind of the music of like The Legend of Zelda. And I just kind of found it really interesting to kind of hear his kind of breakdown of that and how he kind of translates that into putting it into his music.
He probably knows a lot more about it than I do. It's very interesting to look at those exact things. Yeah, how music is used as a storytelling element in a lot of other art. In that case, for example, through like Legend of Zelda or
One of my last
through
questions that I
Pokemon, for
always have for
example.
everybody is just kind of the advice that you would give, just kind of wanting to know what advice you would give to the next generation of producers, you know, are trying to start out and maybe trying to break their way through into the scene.
Like I said earlier, don't expect it to happen all that quickly. Don't even really expect it to happen in the first place, I'd say. Um, Not because it won't happen, it probably will do at some point if you keep at it, but more so like find something else in the music that you enjoy that isn't determined by other people. Because if you have that kind of motivation for it, you can much easier keep going. You can kind of reward yourself along the way and keep yourself motivated and kind of inspired and not end up giving up as
Yeah.
easily on it. Yeah. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how well I worded that.
And are
I
there any
worded it better
questions
earlier on.
that, you know, you were dying to answer that I didn't ask? All
Not
right.
really
And so then my
anything I
last
can think
question
of
for
right now.
you is just kind of wanting to know kind of what's next. Are there any like plans that you just kind of want to hint at that we can expect from you in the future?
Uh, I've been working on a few different things that involve vocals a lot more than my work has done previously, both my own vocals and other singers as well. I've actually got a song that's pretty much almost done. It's just waiting for vocals right now. But long term, I've kind of been working through a lot of ideas that I've had and just really focused on getting better until I could do something I'd planned to do from the start of this whole project. The one hint I can give there is if you look at the very first EP I've ever released on SoundCloud, if you look at the description of it, it says part 1. And to make a long story short, I'm kind of preparing to make part 2 very soon.
And so that is a very exciting thing to hear. And so with that, that's going to do it for this episode of the Keynote podcast. I'd first of all like to give a huge thanks to Emma for agreeing to be on the show and just being such a nice person to talk to. I'm going to be linking all of her social media in the description of whatever platform you're going to be listening to my podcast on. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, please be sure to give me a follow. And I hope you all stay tuned in for next week. Thank you.